Let me ask you, Ms. Lawrence. Your disease is one that actually has had enormous progress because of what the families have done. My friend, who I went to Malden Catholic High School with, Joe O'Donnell, his boy Joey contracted cystic fibrosis, and there was no cure. And companies really weren't doing the research on it. So he, along with the families, each year raised money and then said to biotech companies, if you do research in cystic fibrosis, we'll give you our money to do the research. And ultimately, the families raised hundreds of millions of dollars in order to incentivize research. And that's where a company named Vertex got their funding. It was from the families to give them that incentive. And these breakthroughs have all come because of that incredible entrepreneurial activity. My friend ultimately wound up, Joe O'Donnell, going to Harvard Business School. So we used that model to incentivize the private sector to move. And Joey, little Joey, would be your age today, but he passed away at a very, very young age. But now life expectancy has been lengthened dramatically. So we know that it can happen. We know that the breakthroughs are there. And we just have to find the methodologies that ensure that we're going to have research be medicine's field of dreams from which we harvest the findings that give hope to families, that they won't suffer unnecessarily from diseases in their families' lives. So how, Ms. Lawrence, can we better support patients in response to antimicrobial resistance?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Markey, and happy birthday as well. I actually met Joe last July at a conference, and he is wonderful, and he's done so much for the community, as has the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I work with them on several levels, and I think that they are one thing that they really do well to drive community incentive in working together and funding different things is that they have a patient-centered model of care. So they hear the patient voice. They take into account the community needs and where the lack is, and that better directs the science. They like patients like myself have input at a research level, at a grant level, at a need, like at a workshop level. Every level of the process, the patient voice is front and center. And that has really driven where the money goes and progress.
Beautiful, thank you. Dr. Boucher, in your written testimony, you talked about how climate change facilitates the risk of antimicrobial resistance. Can you talk more about that?
Thank you, Senator Markey, for the question. We know that climate change leads to more antimicrobial resistant infections through a number of ways. One is through wound infections and warmer temperatures, often are infected with antimicrobial resistant organisms. Waterborne organisms travel more, and we see more antimicrobial resistance there. And a lot of pathogens are picked up from the soil that has more resistant organisms in warm and hot climates. So we're already seeing the impacts, and we're doing studies in the Tufts Center looking at wastewater to see, and we're seeing changes already with just the small incremental changes in temperature we've seen. So certainly very linked, and linked in a One Health way, right, from humans, animals, and the environment as we see climate change evolve.
And as temperatures warm, insects, animals now migrate to other parts of the planet that otherwise they would never have moved. And then that causes disease to migrate in ways that perhaps those populations are not as protected against.
Absolutely. We see migration of vectors of illness, things like animals, and we see evolution in places where infection isn't recognized because people haven't put two and two together that the area is moving. For example, moving south, like we've seen with Lyme disease, something very endemic in Massachusetts, which has now moved way south in our country. So lots of change, lots of room to act in the positive as well, and truly back to the wicked problem, one of the multi-pronged approaches needs to be really thinking about climate active impacts on AMR.
And again, wicked is such a Massachusetts Boston word as well, so it's bad. So Dr. Apley, you're an advocate of the One Health perspective. Could you explain the One Health approach and how our environment affects the people's health in the context of antimicrobial resistance?
I think we have been able to identify common approaches that by supporting them, we advance stewardship and our antibiotic decisions across every place we use them. One of the things that's happened in the PAC CARB, again, was as we start to look at issues of fungi, we've brought in someone on that committee, that council, excuse me, that is an expert in agricultural applications of antimicrobials. And so we realize that this One Health really does involve the environment and any place we might be using the antimicrobials. And again, it involves diagnostics, preventives, new and novel ways of preventing disease and dampening it down. Once you break down the silo, just personally from 7.5 years on PAC CARB, the things I learned from the human side that I take to veterinary medicine, and I think maybe that went the other way too, that having a group that's just really focused on breaking down those silos is incredibly important.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Miller, you're the chair of the Antimicrobials Working Group, the Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Industries Coalition on this issue. According to the Government Accountability Office, the existing development of new drugs that could treat bacteria currently resistant to medications is insufficient. Ms. Miller, how are companies partnering with the federal government to incentivize drug development with FDA pathways and exclusivity periods, and is that partnership working?
Thank you for the question, and happy birthday. So, there are really good and productive public-private partnerships to support AMR. It isn't enough in the end, right? Because we need to make sure that we're continually innovating because the bugs are continually evolving. So we need to ensure that we have an ongoing stream of innovation to have newer, safer antimicrobials over time. The existing relationships, they are working though, right? And we need to continue that. At the crux of it, though, we do need to address the commercial marketplace because I believe that if we do that, we will create an incentive for companies and for investors to come back into the space, to do more development, and to ensure that the relationships that we do have, the partnerships that we do have, these products can actually land in the marketplace effectively.
So again, let's talk about that. The families with cystic fibrosis, I think there were only 35,000 in America. Mm-hmm. They saw a market inefficiency. Mm-hmm. They saw where the private sector was not going to respond. So they injected themselves into it, raised the money, said to a number of companies, you do the research, we'll help to fund you. And ultimately, Vertex emerged out of those companies as the one that was doing the best work. So that was a market inefficiency. Just too few people are affected. So what do we have to do, Dr. Boucher, in order to deal with this issue that, such a small number of people potentially benefit from it, but by benefiting from it, they also stop the spread of it potentially?
Senator Markey, happy birthday. I don't want to forget. And thanks for the question. So you hit on one of the key, really important criteria for antibiotics, right? The use in one patient affects a whole community. So that's the why we should care, even if this particular infection only impacts a few. And I'm going to come to something that we haven't talked about explicitly that I think is really important, and that's awareness. So it's a sad reality that in 2023 we still have an awareness problem for this AMR in our country. And holding this hearing is a good step in that, and that's what many of us at this table spend our time trying to do, but we have to do better, right? We still lack a clear voice and a clear patient voice. The National Action Plan has called for a federal champion for AMR. In the UK, you might have seen Dame Sally Davies. She's the champion of AMR. She's now a UN ambassador. She's done more for this in the world. She's leading, and I think we need that in our country. I hear you loud and clear. We are doing more clinical trials with patients at the table as we develop questions and trials through the NIH Antibacterial Resistance Leadership Group. We're making progress on looking at quality of life. Lots more to do and lots more rallying from the base in terms of patients and families.
So talk a little bit more about the champion. Who is that person and what are they doing?
So the champion that I have seen is Dame Sally is the spokesperson in Europe and globally now for this problem. So across the government, across the globe, actually speaking for the different stakeholders and bringing very practical things to the table with one voice and really being recognized. So we at PACCARB recognized this back in 2015, 2016, and it was incorporated into the National Action Plan. It just hasn't been implemented. But I think appointing such an individual would help advance this problem in our response to it.
You're saying that the administration should name a champion.
Yes,
so
the ask is that the
president
president
has a spotlight to continue to keep this issue front and center.
Yes, sir, that's the ask.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll try to help you to accomplish that goal. I think that's a great idea, and we need to have somebody who's in charge to be applying the pressure that all of the families in our country feel on this issue. So let's do this. And thank you all, by the way, so much for this incredible hearing today. I think you're really advancing the cause, and you can see the enormous interest which the subcommittee has in the subject. So